Hi, I'm Steve Hamilton, presenting for CityTram. Today, I want to speak to you about public transit and the climate change opportunity that it represents. Let me start by introducing CityTram, which I founded. CityTram is a group of volunteers across the nation, mostly engineers and technical people. We work locally with transit agencies in an attempt to improve public transit. The organization was modeled after Code for America. The original idea was to work as engineers to develop open source technical solutions designed specifically for transit needs. Unfortunately, we've learned that the transit agencies are really not set up for development of any kind. They're basically purchasing organizations. So most of our volunteers have moved on, and I've spent the past 18 months working mainly in Dade County, Florida, trying to figure out how most effectively to impact these agencies. Now, the reason I care about this issue, and the reason you should also, is that it is a real and practical way to have a measurable impact against global warming. I consider myself an actionist, not an activist. I'm not trying to convince anyone else to believe in the threat of global warming, but I do, so I'm trying to do something about it. So very quickly, I believe four things. One, global warming is a real phenomenon we can measure. Two, the climate change, which results from global warming, is a really big deal, as in potentially a threat to the survival of the human species. Three, the debate about whether it's caused by human activity is a clever trap laid by the climate deniers into which most climate activists have fallen. It is irrelevant. If you wake up in the middle of the night and discover that your house is on fire, the first thing you do is to go study the fire to determine was it an accidental or an act of arson, right? No. You figure out if you can put the fire out, and if not, you get you and your family out of the damn house. It's irrelevant whether human activity causes global warming. The relevant question is, does mankind possess the technological capability to mitigate it? Now that question is a lot easier to answer, and the answer is yes. And four, the governments of the world have done a terrible job of recognizing, acknowledging, and reacting to this threat. So rather than trying to convince government or anyone else to act on global warming, I've decided to engage with the world on problems that we agree on and to find solutions to those problems that also benefit global warming. Urban transport in America is such a case. Everyone agrees it's a problem. Public transit is a failure, and urban congestion is really bad and growing worse. Solving these problems offers a chance to significantly lower the carbon footprint for a massive number of people and improve the quality of their life in the process. I call it Trojan horse capitalism. They're not buying a climate change solution. They're buying a commuting solution. It just happens to have hiding inside it a climate change benefit. So let me frame the climate change problem in a way that helps me show you the size of this opportunity. The greenhouse effect can be modeled as the classic leaky bucket problem. Our atmosphere is the bucket, and we're pouring greenhouse gases into it. Now, good for us, our bucket has a hole in it. Natural processes slowly take the gases out of the atmosphere. So if we want the bucket to stop filling up and start actually slowly draining, then we have to lower the rate at which we're pouring more into it. And we need to do this quickly before the bucket fills up. The faucet we're using to fill up the bucket is the consumption of energy in the form of burning fossil fuels. So we need to either reduce the amount of energy we consume, or we need to consume it in a more benign way, so that less greenhouse gas is produced for each unit of energy. Converting an electrical generation plant from coal to natural gas is an example of that second way. Now, occasionally, you can get a twofer. By reducing the energy used, you can sometimes make it possible to switch the source as well and get an extra benefit. So our approach is to focus on energy reduction. We'll accept anything else as icing on the cake. So let's look at energy consumption. For most of my life, America far and away consumed more energy than any other nation in the world. But with the rise of China as an economic power, they passed us about 10 years ago. Then, due to the Great Recession, the growth in consumption slowed down pretty much everywhere. So today, the situation is that both China and America consume about 1/3 each of all the energy consumed in the world. The final third is used by everybody else. Remember, America is about 350 million people, while China is over 2 billion. So we're still the biggest per capita energy users by a factor of 6 or more. The Department of Energy reports each year about how we use our energy. Electrical generation is the biggest use, but a very close second is transportation. The Department of Transportation reports each year about how we use that energy for various types of transportation. The lion's share of that energy is used by what the DOT calls light-duty vehicles, sometimes called cars and light trucks. Basically, this is the energy that you and I use every day, driving to and from work, school, the grocery store, etc. So you can see that Americans use 6% of the world's energy each year just driving around. Now, the CAFE process, you may have heard about, reports each year about the fleet fuel consumption. But this relates only to new vehicles sold. It does not actually report on the overall existing fleet. I don't know of any source that directly reports on the average fuel consumption of our entire personal vehicle fleet. But you can extract this information pretty easily from information that is directly reported. The DOT tells us that we drive a total of just over 2 trillion miles per year. The DOE monitors and reports on gasoline sales. We consume about 350 million gallons a year. The majority of that, about 94%, is used in vehicles instead of, lawnmowers and the like. So if you do the arithmetic, you'll find out that we only get, on average, 16.64 miles per gallon from our cars. That is pathetic. Criminally low. To give you some appreciation for just how low this is, we can look at the Eco Challenge hosted by Shell Oil each year. This is a competition for college automotive engineering teams. Now this year I'm proud to say that my alma mater, Duke University School of Engineering, won the challenge. They achieved just short of 10,000 miles per gallon. So the theoretical limits are at least 700 times greater than what we actually get today. Now, there's a difference between science and engineering, right? Science, like in this case, the Eco Challenge, shows what's achievable. Engineering shows us what's economically achievable at a mass-produced scale. Now, this table shows the CAFE measurements for the top vehicles in the model year 2017 that are in mass production. The current state of the industry can already do 7 to 8 times better than what our current fleet average is. You might note that all the top achievers are electric vehicles. This makes it possible to actually reap that twofer benefit I was talking about. Rather than having a separate gasoline engine in each vehicle, they can all get their electricity from a single fossil fuel engine that's running at the electricity generation plant. So we burn less energy overall, plus then converting or supplementing that plant with a renewable source becomes feasible. It's a more practical way to actually have solar-powered cars. So how much impact could this have? Well, it depends on how much of our fleet we convert and how much more efficient the new cars are. The red line on this graph shows a 7x improvement. You might call this a bolts for clunkers program, similar to the cars for clunkers program that was part of Obama's stimulus plan. We give people a Chevy Bolt to replace their old gas guzzling clunker with a huge subsidy incentive keyed to the fuel mileage of that trade-in. Bigger incentives for trade-ins with poorer fuel mileage. The graph shows the benefit as a percentage of reduction in energy that's used for light-duty vehicles. Not everyone will be willing to take the deal. Some people, already have fuel-efficient cars, so the incentive won't be enough. Some people just love the cars they have. Some people just hate the idea of a Chevy Bolt. But the Cars for Clunkers program did have a visible impact on fleet mileage. So a similar program kind of on steroids could have some impact. So it's worth noting, what's possible. If we got 40% of the owners to convert to this new best-in-class vehicle, we could reduce the energy used by driving by 1/3. That translates to a 2% reduction in world energy consumption. The greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by that much or more. Now, unfortunately, there's good reason to believe that this approach simply won't work. The current U.S. fleet is about 253 million cars, and owners don't switch cars very often. The average age of cars in that fleet is over 11 years. So to achieve our 40% target would mean 100 million separate purchase decisions. At an average cost per Chevy Bolt of about $30,000, that's $3 trillion worth of cars. So using any reasonably large percentage incentive to strongly motivate conversion would mean a lot of money. There are already tax credit incentives in the range of 20% on EVs. It's not enough. So my guess is we'd need 50% or more to incent people more strongly. So we're talking about more than $1.5 trillion. That's twice the size of Obama's stimulus package. It won't happen. Even if it did happen, it would take a long time to convert the fleet. The average age is 11.4 years. That means a large percentage of those cars is relatively new, certainly less than 11.4 years. It'll take close to 10 years for those cars to get older and therefore be an attractive target for conversion. So this approach would be expensive, slow, and actually very uncertain if we base it on past market behavior. Too slow, too uncertain to be successful. Our former vice president often quoted his father when challenged with value voter claims. His father said, "Don't tell me about your values. Show me your budget. I'll tell you what your values are." Well, I buy this argument, right? A lot of people claim to be concerned about climate change, but only a small percentage of them have actually been willing to pay the 20% price premium to buy a hybrid vehicle and double their mileage, or the 40% premium to buy an EV and quadruple it or more. So I don't see this changing. Again, my Trojan horse capitalism. I'm not selling climate mitigation. I'm selling transportation. Fuel costs are a smaller portion of car expenses than are the purchase and financing, and insuring a more expensive vehicle costs more. So if you dig into the details, you'll find that an EV is net more expensive to own and operate. Maybe not 40% more expensive, but more expensive. Yet, it offers no transportation advantage. It's an electric car, but it's still a car. It does not get me there any faster. So why should I pay extra? This is true of any car-based solution that offers a climate benefit. If it does not also benefit the user, something the user cares about, then adoption of that solution is questionable at best. Certainly, rapid adoption is unlikely. What does the car user care about? He cares about the speed of his commute and how much it costs him. So this is the realization that brings us to public transit. 81% of Americans now live in urban areas. 820 transit agencies serve those urban areas and provide 98% of all transit trips. Typically, these same agencies also are responsible for maintaining and administering the urban roads. Congestion is bad and getting worse, but transit is horrible. It is pathetically slow and inconvenient. As a result, commuters who have a choice choose to drive and deal with the congestion rather than ride transit. Public transit provides only 5% of the trips. Walking and biking are used for about 2 to maybe 3%. Cars are used for about 92% of the trips. But the point is, people make this decision on a per trip basis. Suppose we could actually make public transit work. Suppose it was faster than a car, or even as fast as a car but cheaper. People would start deciding to use it. Then, after using it for a while and becoming convinced that it was reliable, they decide that the expense of a car was no longer worth it. So we don't have to wait for the cars to get old. We can start the conversion right away, as soon as we improve public transit. As long as public transit is also more fuel efficient than cars, then we start to reap those same climate change benefits I described earlier. Now, I know it's hard to believe that public transit could be faster than cars because today it's so slow. But in fact, only public transit has this potential. Private cars, including Uber, must share the same roadway with privately owned cars, lots of them. There's no way it can ever be faster than cars. While public transit owns and controls the rights of way, only public transit agencies can administer those rights of way in a way that gives preference to transit. Current rail, BRT, and elevated guideway systems are proof of this. So in fact, public transit systems are in the best position to offer an improvement to commuters that will motivate them to leave their cars. Now, it certainly won't be easy. Public transit in America is a miserable failure. Not only is it a pitiful 5% market share, but it loses 200 to 300% of revenues in doing so, requiring huge public subsidies. And worst of all, it's the bureaucratic manifestation of Einstein's definition of insanity. They've tried the same failing things over and over again for 30 years, with ridership locked at 5% and losses growing 5% per year. They are culturally and organizationally crippled. That's why it's going to require an organized citizen movement to fix them, especially to fix them quickly. But it is doable. In fact, we've done this before. What we have now is a technology problem. Buses and trains are not the solution. But when a new transit technology arrives that is clearly better, a paradigm shift occurs quickly. Look at the transformation that happened on Main Street in New York in the first years of the 20th century. And remember the prize. If we can improve the public transit offerings and get commuters to convert for 40% of their trips, then the world will use 2% less energy. And that's 2% less greenhouse gas emissions or more. and it's motivated by self-interest. So it's a stable and self-sustaining change, not one that's subject to the political whims. So my question is, will you join me in this challenge?